The Williamsburg Bridge does not announce itself with grandeur. It connects Manhattan to Brooklyn across the East River with a functional brutality, a steel lattice framework erected in 1903 that has carried subway trains, vehicles, and pedestrians for over a century. The bridge is utilitarian, industrial, and profoundly indifferent to the millions who cross it. By 1995, it was 92 years old, its iron bones fatigued by endless vibration, its cable housing corroded by salt air and decades of deferred maintenance. The subway tracks that run along its lower deck carry the J, M, and Z lines, threading through a structure that was never designed with modern transit loads in mind. The trains passed through semi-enclosed passageways where winds shrieked between the girders and the river below churned dark and cold, especially in winter. January of 1995 was particularly harsh in New York City. Temperatures remained below freezing for weeks, snow turned to ice on the bridge's walkways, and the metal contracted in the cold, groaning under the weight of constant traffic. Maintenance crews had been reporting unusual stress fractures in the support beams since late 1994, but budget cuts and bureaucratic inertia meant these reports circulated without action. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority was managing a system stretched beyond its capacity, plagued by aging infrastructure and mounting operational demands. The Williamsburg Bridge was not a priority. It was merely one component in a vast, creaking network that moved 8 million people daily through tunnels and over water, through spaces most riders never saw and would never want to. On the morning of January 17th, a southbound M train departed the Marcy Avenue station in Brooklyn at approximately 6:43 a.m. It was the early commute, the train half full with hospital workers, cleaning staff, and those whose labor begins before dawn. The train consisted of 8 cars, R40 models built in the late 1960s, heavy and angular, their interiors lit by fluorescent tubes that flickered and hummed. The motorman, whose name would later be redacted from most official documents, had been operating trains for 11 years. He knew the bridge crossing well, the way the train slowed slightly as it entered the enclosed section, the vibration that intensified as the wheels met the expansion joints, the brief moment of disorientation as natural light vanished and the tunnel embraced the cars. The train entered the bridge approach at 6:46. Witnesses in cars crossing the upper deck later reported hearing nothing unusual. The subway tracks run below the roadway, partially shielded from view, enclosed by aging steel paneling that rattles with every passing train. Inside the train, passengers read newspapers, stared out windows into the dim passage, or closed their eyes against the monotony of routine. The temperature inside the cars was overheated, the result of a malfunctioning climate control system common to that series of train. Condensation formed on the windows. The fluorescent lights continued their unsteady hum. At 6:47 and approximately 30 seconds, the train was midway across the bridge when the motorman felt the braking system engage without his input. This was not entirely unusual. Automatic braking systems were designed to activate if sensors detected irregularities, but the engagement was harsh, abrupt, throwing standing passengers forward and causing seated riders to brace against the sudden deceleration. The motorman immediately attempted to release the brake and regain control, following protocol. The brake did not release. The train continued to slow, the wheels shrieking against the rails as momentum fought mechanical resistance. Within seconds, the train came to a complete stop, suspended above the East River inside the bridge's lower passage, surrounded by steel and darkness. Protocol dictated that the motorman radio the control center immediately. He did so. The radio produced only static. He tried again. The communication system, already unreliable in the enclosed sections of older infrastructure, failed to transmit. Backup systems similarly produced no connection. The motorman was trained for this scenario, though training does little to calm the instinctive unease of being trapped in a steel tube above freezing water with no communication. He made an announcement to the passengers over the intercom, informing them of a temporary delay due to a mechanical issue, advising them to remain calm and seated. His voice, preserved in later testimony, was steady but edged with something passengers would later describe as uncertainty. Minutes passed. The train did not move. Passengers began to murmur, then speak aloud, asking questions no one could answer. Some stood and moved toward the windows, peering out into the darkness of the passage. There was nothing to see except the occasional dim service light bolted to the bridge's interior framework, casting weak yellow illumination that barely penetrated the gloom. The sound of wind was constant, a low whistle that seemed to emanate from the structure itself. The train's ventilation system continued to operate, but the air grew stale quickly, thick with the scent of unwashed coats and bodies pressed too close together. The motorman left his compartment and walked through the cars, attempting to reassure passengers while assessing the situation. In the fourth car, an elderly man began to hyperventilate, convinced something catastrophic was imminent. A nurse traveling to her shift at Bellevue Hospital attended to him, speaking in low, soothing tones. In the sixth car, a group of teenagers laughed nervously, making jokes about being stuck, their humor a thin mask over growing anxiety. The motorman returned to his compartment and attempted the radio again. Still nothing. He checked his watch. It was now 6:52. They had been stationary for approximately 4.5 minutes. At 6:54, passengers in the rear cars reported hearing a sound. It was not the wind, nor the typical groaning of the bridge under load. It was a metallic scraping, rhythmic and deliberate, as if something heavy was being dragged along the exterior of the train. Several passengers stood and pressed their faces to the windows, trying to locate the source. The sound continued for perhaps 20 seconds, then stopped abruptly. Silence returned, broken only by the wind and the anxious breathing of 78 people trapped in a machine that had ceased to obey the laws governing its operation. The motorman did not hear this sound. He was focused on the control panel, attempting to manually override the braking system. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, flipping switches, checking indicators, searching for the fault that had paralyzed the train. According to his later statement, he became aware of a smell. It was faint at first, metallic and sharp, reminiscent of burnt wiring but not quite identical. He checked for smoke, for any sign of electrical fire, and found none. The smell persisted, growing incrementally stronger until it reached the passenger cars. People began to cough, covering their noses with scarves and sleeves, asking aloud what was burning. Nothing was burning. The smell had no identifiable source. It would later be described in passenger testimonies as resembling ozone or blood or industrial solvent, though no consensus was ever reached. Some passengers reported not smelling at all. The inconsistency of these accounts would become a point of contention in the investigations that followed, dismissed by some as mass hysteria, emphasized by others as evidence of something overlooked. At 6:58, the train's lights flickered, once, twice, then steadied. A collective gasp moved through the cars. In the darkness of the bridge passage, even a momentary loss of light was profoundly disorienting. The motorman felt sweat gather beneath his collar despite the cold. He tried the radio again, and this time, through the static, a voice responded. It was brief, distorted, barely comprehensible. The motorman repeated his message. M-train, stopped mid-bridge, unable to proceed, request immediate assistance. The voice on the other end said something that sounded like wait, or perhaps waits, or possibly wake. Then the connection dissolved back into static and did not return. The Williamsburg Bridge was never intended to carry the weight it bears. Designed at the turn of the 20th century, its engineering was ambitious for the era, but predicated on assumptions about usage that became obsolete within decades. The original plans accounted for lighter rail traffic, fewer vehicles, and a population density that had since tripled. By 1995, the bridge was handling approximately 200,000 vehicles daily, along with dozens of subway trains. Engineers had warned repeatedly that the structure was approaching the limits of its operational safety, that metal fatigue was accumulating in critical load-bearing components, that the vibration from subway trains was exacerbating stress fractures in the suspension cables and floor beams. These warnings, documented in reports filed with the MTA and the Department of Transportation, resulted in minor cosmetic repairs and deferred comprehensive rehabilitation due to cost constraints and logistical complexity. The subway tracks on the bridge are particularly vulnerable. They rest on steel beams that span the gaps between the main support trusses, subjected to constant dynamic loading as trains pass. Unlike modern rail systems with continuous welded rail and advanced dampening systems, the Williamsburg Bridge tracks are segmented, joined by expansion plates that clatter and shift with temperature changes. The R40 trains, heavy and outdated by 1995 standards, amplified these stresses. Each wheel assembly delivered concentrated force to the trackbed, force that transmitted directly into the aging bridge framework. Over 90 years, billions of wheel impacts had created microfractures throughout the metal lattice, invisible to casual inspection, but measurable with specialized equipment that was rarely deployed. In the months preceding January 1995, several incidents had occurred on the bridge that attracted limited attention. In September 1994, a northbound J train experienced a brief power failure mid-crossing, restoring after approximately 90 seconds. The motorman filed a report. The incident was attributed to a momentary voltage drop in the third rail. In November, maintenance workers reported discovering a section of railing on the pedestrian walkway that had separated from its mounting bolts, hanging loose over the roadway below. Inspection revealed corrosion had compromised the fasteners. Temporary repairs were made. In early December, a track inspector walking the subway line noted unusual wear patterns on the rails near the bridge's midpoint, a kind of scoring that did not correspond to normal wheel contact. He photographed the damage and submitted it with his monthly report. No action was taken. There was also the matter of the sounds. Bridge workers, particularly those assigned to overnight maintenance shifts, reported hearing anomalies. Descriptions varied: metallic groaning distinct from the usual wind-induced vibrations, sudden sharp cracks like gunshots echoing through the girders, and on several occasions, rhythmic impacts that seemed to originate from within the enclosed subway passage when no trains were present. These reports were not formally documented in most cases, dismissed as the normal acoustic phenomena of a large metal structure, subjected to temperature fluctuations and wind stress. One worker, interviewed years later under condition of anonymity, stated that the bridge sounded angry in the weeks before January 17th, that the usual creaks and groans had acquired a different quality, something lower and more resonant, as if the structure itself was complaining. Inside the stalled train at 6:59 a.m., the situation had progressed from inconvenience to distress. The air quality had noticeably deteriorated despite the functioning ventilation system. Passengers were sweating, fanning themselves with newspapers, removing coats. Several people demanded to be let off the train, pounding on the doors and yelling toward the motorman's compartment. The motorman, acting on protocol, refused to open the doors. Evacuating passengers onto the narrow service walkway within the bridge passage in darkness above the river was considered more dangerous than keeping them aboard. He made another announcement, repeating that help was on the way, that the situation was under control. His words provided no comfort. People knew when they were being lied to, even if the lies were procedural and well-intentioned. At 7:04, the train's public address system activated on its own. No one had pressed the intercom button. What emerged from the speakers was not a human voice, but a sustained, low-frequency tone, a droning hum that filled the cars and seemed to vibrate in passengers' chests. It lasted approximately 8 seconds, then cut off sharply. Several passengers began to cry. Others sat in rigid silence, staring straight ahead. The teenagers in the 6th car had stopped laughing. One of them, a 16-year-old boy, later told investigators that he had been on the bridge hundreds of times and never felt afraid until that moment, that the sound made him understand he was inside something vast and indifferent that did not care whether he lived or died. The motorman, hearing the tone, felt a chill move down his spine despite the heat. He checked the PA system controls. Everything appeared normal. He toggled the switch off and on. Nothing happened. He decided then to attempt manual override procedure, a procedure that required accessing the undercarriage control box. This meant leaving the train. He retrieved a flashlight, unlocked the side door of the motorman's compartment, and stepped out onto the narrow maintenance walkway that ran alongside the tracks inside the bridge passage. The cold struck him immediately. Outside the insulated train, the temperature was barely above freezing, the wind slicing through the gaps in the bridge's paneling with brutal efficiency. The walkway was perhaps 2 feet wide, bordered by a low railing beyond which was a sheer drop to the river. The flashlight beam revealed concrete and steel receding into darkness in both directions. The service lights bolted to the walls provided minimal illumination, spaced too far apart, their bulbs dim and discolored with age. The motorman could hear the river below, a constant rush of water against the bridge pilings, and beneath that, a deeper vibration that seemed to emanate from the structure itself, a subsonic hum that he felt more than heard. He moved carefully along the walkway toward the undercarriage access panel, located near the front of the first car. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air. The flashlight beam shook slightly with each step. When he reached the access panel, he knelt and opened it, revealing the manual override mechanism. The system was hydraulic, controlled by a series of valves and pressure switches. He inspected each component. Everything appeared functional. No leaks, no broken seals, no obvious faults. Yet the brakes remained engaged. He attempted the override sequence, turning valves in the prescribed order. The brakes did not release. He tried again. Still nothing. According to mechanical logic, the system should have responded. It did not. While he worked, he became aware that the vibration in the bridge had changed. It was stronger now, more rhythmic, almost pulsing. He placed his hand flat against the steel wall of the train and felt it, a steady throb like a heartbeat. He looked up, shining his flashlight along the length of the bridge passage. The beam illuminated girders and cables and shadows, but nothing that explained the sensation. He stood, intending to return to the train and attempt contact with the control center again, when he saw something further down the walkway. It was difficult to discern at first, partly obscured by the angle and the poor light. A shape, darker than the surrounding darkness, positioned near the track approximately 50 feet away. It did not move. The motorman directed his flashlight toward it, and the beam revealed nothing, as if the darkness there absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. He felt his pulse quicken. He called out, asking if someone was there, if another worker was in the passage. His voice echoed flatly off the metal walls and received no answer. He took a step forward, then stopped. Every instinct told him not to approach. He retreated instead, moving quickly back to the train's side door, climbing inside and sealing it behind him. He did not report what he had seen, or thought he had seen, to the passengers. He returned to his compartment, hands trembling slightly, and tried the radio once more. This time, to his immense relief, the connection held. The voice on the other end was clear. Control Center confirmed they had received his distress call that a rescue train was being dispatched to push the stalled M train off the bridge. Estimated arrival was 7:25. The motorman acknowledged and relayed the information to the passengers. The announcement was met with a mixture of relief and residual anxiety. 20 more minutes inside the bridge, inside the heat and the strange smells and the silence, broken only by wind. 20 more minutes suspended above the river in a place that felt increasingly like nowhere at all. But the rescue train did not arrive at 7:25. At 7:30, the motorman radioed again. Control Center responded that there had been a delay, signal problems on the approach tracks, but the rescue train was now in motion and would arrive shortly. The passengers hearing this update reacted with anger. Shouting erupted in several cars. A man in the third car kicked the door repeatedly, denting the metal. Others joined in, a crescendo of frustration and fear that the motorman could not contain. He stopped trying. He sat in his compartment, watching the control panel, waiting for something to change. At 7:38, all the lights in the train went out. The darkness was absolute. No emergency lighting activated. The fluorescent tubes that had hummed for nearly an hour simply ceased, and 78 people found themselves in a blackness so complete that hands held inches from faces were invisible. The screaming began immediately, raw and primal, echoing through the cars and out into the bridge passage, where it dissipated into the constant wind. The motorman, trained for emergency scenarios, reached for his flashlight and activated it, sweeping the beam across the control panel. Every indicator was dark. Total electrical failure. He tried the radio. Dead. He tried the door release mechanism to access the passengers. It was electronically locked, and without power, it would not open. He was trapped in his compartment, separated from the people who were now pounding on the connecting door, demanding help, demanding light, demanding escape. The power failure lasted 97 seconds. When the lights returned, they did so all at once, a sudden harsh brightness that was almost painful after the darkness. The screaming subsided into sobbing and ragged breathing. Several passengers had urinated on themselves in terror. Others sat with their heads between their knees, hyperventilating. The nurse who had earlier helped the elderly man was now attending to 3 different people in various stages of panic. The motorman, finally able to open the connecting door, moved through the train attempting to restore order, speaking in what he hoped was a calm and authoritative voice, though later testimony would describe him as appearing visibly shaken, his face pale and damp with sweat. At 7:41, the rescue train arrived. Its headlight appeared in the tunnel behind them, a bright single eye growing larger, and the relief among the passengers was palpable. The rescue train coupled to the rear of the stalled M train with a metallic clang that reverberated through all 8 cars. The plan was simple: push the disabled train forward off the bridge to the Marcy Avenue station, where passengers could disembark safely. The motorman of the rescue train radioed to confirm coupling was secure and that he was ready to proceed. The stalled train's motorman acknowledged. The rescue train's engine engaged, and slowly, incrementally, the stalled M train began to move. The forward motion was uneven, lurching, as the rescue train pushed against the engaged brakes of the disabled train. Friction generated heat. Passengers near the rear cars reported smelling burning metal. But the train moved, meter by meter, groaning through the bridge passage toward the Brooklyn side. The entire length of the enclosed section was approximately 300 meters. At the slow pace imposed by the mechanical resistance, crossing would take several minutes. The passengers, standing now, crowding the windows, watched the dim service lights slide past, counting them, marking progress toward open air and safety. At 7:44, the train stopped again. This time, both trains stopped. The rescue train's engine cut out abruptly, its lights extinguishing, its presence behind them suddenly inert. The motorman of the rescue train attempted to restart. The engine turned over, but would not catch. He tried again. Nothing. 2 trains, now 16 cars, were motionless inside the bridge, carrying over 120 people when the rescue crew was included. The radios on both trains produced only static. The backup communication systems failed to activate. Inside the bridge passage, insulated from the outside world by steel and concrete, no cell phones functioned in 1995, and even if they had, there was no signal penetration. The situation had transitioned from mechanical failure to crisis. The motorman of the stalled M train made the decision to evacuate. It violated protocol, but protocol assumed that help would arrive, that communication would be maintained, that systems would eventually function. None of these assumptions held. He announced to the passengers that they would be exiting the train and walking along the service walkway to the far end of the bridge. He instructed them to move slowly, stay together, and follow his lead. The doors were manually released. Passengers began to file out into the cold and the darkness, stepping onto the narrow walkway, gripping the railing, moving in a slow, shuffling line toward the distant exit. The walk should have taken 15 minutes. The bridge passage was not infinitely long, but distances become distorted in darkness. Time stretches when every step must be measured and careful. The line of passengers extended behind the motorman like a funeral procession, illuminated only by his flashlight and the weak service lights. The wind cut through their clothing. The sound of the river below was louder here, mixed with the creaking of the bridge under its own weight. Some passengers wept as they walked. Others were silent, concentrating on placing one foot in front of the other, not looking down, not thinking about the drop. Halfway through the evacuation, a woman near the middle of the line screamed. She pointed toward the tracks where the two trains sat motionless in the gloom. She claimed she had seen movements between the cars, a figure walking in the opposite direction, moving toward the rear of the train. Others looked but saw nothing. The motorman, hearing the commotion, called back that no one was to leave the line, that everyone must keep moving forward. The woman insisted, becoming hysterical, that someone was there, that someone was walking the wrong way. Two men near her held her arms and guided her forward, whispering reassurances, though their eyes kept darting back toward the trains, searching the shadows. The group reached the end of the bridge passage at 8:06. They emerged into the open air of the Marcy Avenue station approach, where morning light, pale and cold, illuminated the tracks and the platform ahead. Transit police and emergency personnel were already on site, having been alerted by the prolonged silence from both trains. The passengers stumbled onto the platform, some collapsing, others standing dazed, wrapped in shock blankets distributed by paramedics. The motorman gave a preliminary report to the transit police lieutenant in charge, describing the sequence of failures, the power outages, the communication breakdowns. He did not mention what he thought he had seen on the walkway before attempting the manual override. It seemed irrelevant, a product of stress and poor lighting. The rescue train's motorman and his crew emerged last, after ensuring no one remained aboard either train. They reported the same failures: total electrical collapse, unresponsive engine, dead communication systems. Mechanics were dispatched immediately to inspect both trains. They entered the bridge passage with equipment and lights, climbing aboard the silent cars, accessing panels and running diagnostics. What they found defied easy explanation. There was no single point of failure. The braking system, the electrical system, the communication array, the engine of the rescue train, all had failed independently and nearly simultaneously. Each system showed no obvious damage, no burnt components, no broken connections. According to the diagnostic tests, everything should have been functional, yet nothing had worked. One mechanic, exploring the undercarriage of the M train, discovered scoring on the brake pads that was inconsistent with normal wear. The metal showed deep gouges, as if something had physically clamped the wheels beyond the capacity of the hydraulic system. The pattern suggested external force, but there was no mechanism on the train capable of producing such an effect. He photographed the damage and filed it in his report. Another mechanic found the electrical junction box in the rescue train had been subjected to extreme cold, far below ambient temperature, enough to cause temporary brittleness in the wiring insulation. But the temperature inside the bridge passage, while cold, was not extreme enough to produce this effect naturally. The insulation showed microfractures that would normally take years of thermal cycling to develop. The mechanic noted it, but offered no hypothesis. By noon, both trains had been powered remotely and towed off the bridge to maintenance yards. The bridge itself was inspected by structural engineers, who found nothing immediately alarming, though they recommended accelerated rehabilitation work on the subway track supports. The incident was classified as a compound mechanical failure, attributed to aging infrastructure and unfortunate coincidence.
The official report, filed 3 weeks later, ran to 47 pages and concluded with recommendations for system upgrades and improved emergency protocols. It did not mention the sounds passengers reported, the smell that had no source, or the figure seen walking between the cars. These details were considered subjective, unreliable, and immaterial to the technical investigation. But the passengers remembered. In the days and weeks following, several reported ongoing psychological effects: nightmares featuring darkness and enclosed spaces, acute anxiety when riding subways, intrusive thoughts about the bridge. Some refused to use the Williamsburg Bridge line again, rerouting their commutes despite the inconvenience. Others described a persistent feeling of being watched, particularly in transitional spaces like tunnels and stairwells. A support group formed, organized by the nurse who had attended to passengers during the incident. They met twice a month in a community center in Williamsburg, sharing their experiences, trying to process trauma that official narratives dismissed as overreaction. One passenger, a 42-year-old accountant, conducted his own investigation. He filed Freedom of Information requests for all incident reports related to the Williamsburg Bridge subway line, dating back 10 years. What he received after months of bureaucratic delay was a stack of redacted documents, pages with entire sections blacked out, references to incidents that had no accompanying details. He found patterns, clusters of mechanical failures in specific years, mentions of unexplained phenomena that were never elaborated, notes about employee complaints that were dismissed or ignored. He compiled this information into a binder and brought it to the support group meetings. Some members were interested, others wanted to move on, to forget. The accountant could not forget. He kept digging.
The official response to the Williamsburg Bridge incident was swift and definitive. Within a year, portions of the bridge underwent structural reinforcement, the subway tracks were rebedded with improved dampening systems, and the R40 train series was phased out ahead of schedule, replaced by newer rolling stock. The MTA issued statements emphasizing their commitment to safety and infrastructure investment. Press coverage was minimal. A subway delay, even one involving evacuation, was not extraordinary news in a city where the transit system experienced dozens of disruptions daily. By the end of 1995, the incident had been largely forgotten by everyone except those who'd been inside the train. But the bridge did not forget. Workers assigned to maintenance details on the Williamsburg Bridge began to request transfers. The requests were rarely explicit about reasons, couched in terms of family needs or career advancement. But informally, among the crews, the truth circulated. The bridge felt wrong, especially the subway passage, especially at night. The sounds were worse. The groaning and creaking had intensified, accompanied now by vibrations that seemed to come from nowhere, rattling tools off surfaces, making scaffolding sway though no train was passing. On 3 separate occasions in 1996, workers reported seeing movement in the darkened sections of the passage, shapes that did not correspond to structural elements or equipment. One worker quit immediately after his shift, refusing to return even to collect his final paycheck. Another filed a formal complaint, stating that he felt actively unwelcome in the space, that the atmosphere was oppressive and hostile. The complaint was noted and filed without action. Passengers using the J, M, and Z lines continued to cross the bridge daily, most unaware of the incident or its aftermath. But a subset, particularly those who rode during the early morning or late evening hours, reported experiences that echoed the events of January 17th. Unexplained delays mid-bridge, lasting seconds or minutes, during which the lights flickered or the air grew inexplicably cold. Smells that appeared and vanished without source. Sounds over the PA system that were not announcements but tones or static, or in one account, something resembling a voice speaking in a language no one recognized. These reports were filed with customer service, categorized as complaints about service quality, and generated automated responses thanking the rider for their feedback. The accountant who had compiled the incident reports continued his research. He expanded his scope, looking into the history of the Williamsburg Bridge itself, searching for prior incidents that might establish a pattern.
What he found was extensive. Since its opening in 1903, the bridge had been the site of numerous accidents and fatalities. Workers had died during construction, falling from the towers or crushed by machinery. Pedestrians had jumped or fallen from the walkways, their bodies recovered from the river below. Vehicles had crashed through the railings. In 1911, a trolley car derailed on the bridge, injuring 23. In 1938, a truck carrying industrial chemicals overturned, spilling its load into the river and creating a toxic plume that closed the bridge for 2 days. In 1967, a fire broke out in the subway passage, started by arcing electrical cables, filling the tunnel with smoke and forcing the evacuation of 4 trains. The list went on, a catalog of human suffering and mechanical failure spanning nearly a century.
He also found references to older stories, predating the bridge. The land on both sides, the riverbanks, had their own histories. Manhattan's Lower East Side and Brooklyn's Williamsburg had been dense immigrant neighborhoods, teeming with poverty and disease in the 19th century. Cholera outbreaks, tenement fires, industrial accidents. The area had absorbed generations of death and hardship before the bridge was ever conceived. Some local historians, consulted by the accountant, mentioned folklore about the river itself, stories that circulated among the communities who lived beside it. The East River was not truly a river, but a tidal strait, connecting the Atlantic Ocean to Long Island Sound, its currents treacherous and unpredictable. Bodies that went into the water often did not surface, dragged by the current or trapped beneath the pilings of bridges and piers. The accountant documented all of this, adding it to his binder, though he struggled to articulate what he believed it meant. In 1998, 3 years after the incident, one of the motormen involved, not the motorman of the stalled M train, but the motorman of the rescue train, took his own life. He left no note. His family, in their grief, mentioned to a reporter that he had never fully recovered from the bridge incident, that he suffered from insomnia and had become withdrawn and anxious. He had requested reassignments away from the Williamsburg line multiple times and been denied due to staffing shortages. The MTA released a statement expressing condolences, but emphasizing that there was no evidence linking his death to workplace conditions. The incident received a brief mention in the local news and was quickly forgotten. The support group for passengers dissolved in 1999, its membership dwindling as people moved on with their lives or chose to process their experiences privately. The nurse who had organized it kept the contact list, occasionally sending emails to check on former members. Most responded positively, reporting that time had eased the psychological impact. A few did not respond. One wrote back to say that he still could not ride the subway without experiencing panic attacks, that he had switched to bus transportation exclusively, that he sometimes woke in the night convinced he was still inside the train, trapped in the darkness, feeling the vibration of the bridge around him like the heartbeat of something vast and indifferent. Structural assessments of the Williamsburg Bridge continued on a regular schedule. Engineers noted ongoing deterioration, stress fractures that expanded despite reinforcement efforts, corrosion that progressed faster than predicted. In 2004, a major rehabilitation project was approved, involving the replacement of the entire roadway deck and significant work on the subway track supports. The project took 3 years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. During construction, portions of the bridge were closed, subway service was rerouted, and workers operated around the clock. Several construction crews reported the same complaints that had plagued maintenance workers: oppressive atmosphere, unexplained sounds, feelings of being watched. One foreman documented these complaints and submitted them to the project manager, who dismissed them as stress and fatigue. The foreman did not press the issue. The work was completed in 2007. The bridge was declared structurally sound for the foreseeable future. But the incidents did not stop. They became less frequent, perhaps, or less reported, but they persisted. In 2010, a northbound J train experienced a power failure mid-bridge, identical to the failures in 1995. The train was restored after 3 minutes and continued to its destination. No investigation was conducted. The incident was logged as routine. In 2013, a passenger reported seeing a figure standing on the tracks inside the bridge passage, a shape that did not move or react to the approaching train.
She filed a report with transit police, who found nothing during an inspection. In 2017, a maintenance worker replacing a section of railing discovered markings carved into the steel girders deep inside the passage, markings that appeared to be text but in no recognizable language or alphabet. He photographed them and showed his supervisor, who instructed him to complete his work and not discuss what he had seen. The photographs were never officially documented. The accountant, now in his 60s, maintains his archive. It has grown to 3 binders filled with reports, photographs, testimony, and historical records. He has tried on several occasions to interest journalists or researchers in his findings, but the response is always the same. There is no story here, only a collection of unrelated incidents stretched across time, coincidences amplified by selective interpretation. He no longer argues. He simply adds new information as it comes to him, passed along by former passengers or workers who find his contact information through old support group networks or internet searches. The most recent addition was in 2024, a report from a motorman who felt while crossing the bridge late one night that his train was being followed, that something was pacing it just beyond the range of the headlights, matching its speed exactly, though the tracks behind him were empty. The Williamsburg Bridge continues to operate. Trains cross it every few minutes during peak hours, carrying thousands of passengers who stare at phones or sleep or watch the skyline pass, unaware of the history beneath them, the accumulation of failures and fears and unexplained phenomena that saturate the structure. The bridge does not offer explanations. It simply endures, steel and cable and concrete holding against the weight of the city and the river and time. And in the darkest hours, when the trains are infrequent and the wind howls through the girders, those who listen carefully might hear, beneath the mechanical sounds of transit and infrastructure, something else, a low vibration, rhythmic and steady, like a pulse, emanating from the depths of the passage, from the spaces where light does not reach, where the bridge keeps its secrets locked in metal and silence and the cold indifference of survival.